He's the executive director of NC Live, a 205-member statewide library cooperative hosted right here at North Carolina State. Please welcome to the stage, Rob Ross.
All right, any other librarians in the room? Yeah, I'm always the only one. All right. So I'm going to talk about fake news being old news. So let's start with the definition in the interest of time. So I'll start by defining it, as many of us do, false stories that appear in the news, spread on the internet, or using other media to create, to influence political views or change your mind, right? So that's one definition. Let's talk about another one. Anything I disagree with, right? So there are two definitions of fake news, at least, that are used all the time. So I'm going to give you two historic examples of these and then some contemporary examples so that you can see that fake news is old news. We've always had it and we've always coped with it, and libraries play a role in that. Okay, how many of you, show of hands, are familiar with the Stamp Act of 1765? That's way more than I expected. Okay, well done, well done. Okay, so in a nutshell, the Stamp Act was the British trying to tax the colonies on all things paper, basically. And this predates the Revolution, so you know that we were still getting excited about this. So at the time, the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts was this guy, Thomas Hutchinson, and he was, of course, pro-British, but on this particular issue, the Stamp Act, he was not for it. He was against it, so that's important. There was this guy, Sam Adams. Many of you are drinking him right now, right? So Sam Adams, he was a fake news writer at the time. You may not know this. So he would write these inflammatory articles in the newspaper to get everyone riled up against the Brits. So when the Stamp Act was coming up, Sam Adams wrote these articles. Much of it was false, but he said, you know, if we support this, we'll be enslaved forever, etc. So he got folks so fired up that they burned down the governor's mansion where Hutchinson's lived. So he was fine, he lived. But what's interesting is he was against the Stamp Act. The fake news just got everyone so excited that they actually took violent action, right? So this has always been with us, this idea that fake news can spread and cause people to take violent action. How many of you are familiar with Pizzagate from 2016? Less. That's really weird. Some history buffs in the room. All right. So let me catch you up on recent history. In 2016, WikiLeaks released John Podesta's emails. He was the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. And in those emails, there are lots of them, but some was correspondence to a pizza parlor in D.C. called Comet Pizza. And this is going to shock you, but the emails were mostly about pizza. I know, brace yourself. But conspiracy theorists thought this can't possibly be about pizza. That's too inane. Pizza must be a cipher. It must be a code for something else. So conspiracy theorists said, Noah, it's not about pizza. It's about a child sex ring run by Hillary Clinton and her cohorts. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you think about it. So they you know, most of this we can sort of laugh at it and say, well, that's crazy. But a man in Salisbury, North Carolina, read this, and as far as I could tell in my research, had never had a history of crime, wasn't violent, had no mental illness. He read this stuff and he believed it. So his real crime, he couldn't tell fake news from real news. That was his crime. He wasn't literate in information. So he read this, he got into his Toyota Prius, he drove from North Carolina to DC with a gun. He went into Comet Pizza and started shooting. He was looking for the kids. He wanted to save the kids. Luckily, no one was harmed, and he was arrested. But again, this was a guy that seemingly is just like everybody else, except that when he read these conspiracy theories, he couldn't tell that they were conspiracy theories. Okay, so that's the equivalent of burning down the mansion. One more, and I'm afraid to ask now because you guys are so smart, but in 1798, there were a couple acts passed called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Let's talk about that. At the time, we were sort of at war with the French. It was something called the XYZ affair. It wasn't a real war. We had gone to France. They sort of dissed us. They gave us a glove slap. And so we were in this like 4-year mini war with France. So the president at the time was John Adams, pictured here looking pretty sexy. So here's John Adams. And so John Adams became very suspicious of any foreigner because we were at war with France. So if you were from France and you were an immigrant or you were from another European nation, very suspicious. So he and his Federalist colleagues, they passed these acts which made it really easy to deport someone. You almost needed no pretense to get rid of someone. And also, more interestingly, you could not criticize the government. So they arrested 20 editors of newspapers because they were critical of the government, and they even arrested the representative of Vermont and put him in jail for 4 months because he basically wrote an op-ed. That's what happened. So this was happening. And just to put a face on that, imagine if Bernie Sanders was thrown in prison because he wrote an op-ed. That was the equivalent of what was happening under that regime. Okay, so this almost doesn't require me to say anything, but in recent times, we've lived through a Muslim ban, so being suspicious of folks that aren't from here. The same thing with the southern border and the separation. Again, we're suspicious of folks from other countries. And then this attack on the press. So we haven't passed a law like the Sedition or Alien Acts, but we have the press has been declared the enemy of the people. And just today, if you haven't caught up in the news, pipe bombs were sent to Hillary Clinton and Obama and a few other folks, liberals. So this is happening. So people are reading stuff online and they're taking action, sometimes violent action. And then, of course, I don't want to jump over this, but 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post journalist who was killed in Turkey. So these are real-life examples of things that have happened a long time ago. So I'm a librarian, so I'm going to tell you that I can't tell you that libraries will save the day. It's not just technology. It's not just learning about fishing. It's a lot of stuff. But I will say that since the dawn of libraries, our job has been to help people tell good information from bad information. And the reason we can do this is that we're highly trusted. So this is a Pew Research poll from 2016 that says that librarians are more trusted than institutions, family, and friends. Isn't that weird? You trust a like I could be a sociopath, but because I'm a librarian, you guys are like, oh, you wouldn't lie to me. So librarians are highly trusted in our societies, and I think the reason is certainly we have partisan views like everybody else, but when it comes to our job is to help people make sense of information and say, okay, this is a bad source, this is a high quality source. We're not judging it, we're just telling you, if it's newsworthy or trustworthy or not. So I think we've always done that well, and we'll continue to do that. And I'll leave you with this, because I've been belled. So this is the challenge, right? 2 trillion searches were conducted on Google. So this is where people are getting information. And you know this. They're not getting it necessarily from a library. 44% of households that were surveyed said no one in their household uses the library. So we can't reach everybody. So it's really up to all of us to figure out how can we help people make sense of information. What's the good stuff? What's the bad stuff? I'll leave you with that.
Sometimes you get the bell. I know. All right, questions for Rob Ross about the role of libraries here in the fight against fake news. Question right here.
Well, as you ended, you said not many people are using libraries. How do we get them to use them more often?
Yeah, I shouldn't have jumped over that slide. Yeah, so the quick answer, I think academic libraries, we have a huge advantage because we have a captive audience. One, folks are actively getting an education, so they're learning in all disciplines, and we often have professors force them to come to the library, and so we could teach them about this stuff. What I worry about are folks that aren't in college, because either they go to their public library or they don't, and then it's just them and the internet. And again, the guy in Salisbury is a perfect example. I don't know, maybe there's more to the story, but I think he just couldn't tell real from fake. And he, like any of us, if we were all convinced children were being raped and murdered, we would probably do something about it. And that was his story. He really didn't know better. So yeah, I think academic is easy. I think public is really hard.
All right, next question from the back row here.
Yes.
Thank you. What a great presentation. Yes, you might be a sociopath, but you are, in fact, a librarian. So what rubrics would you use, would you share with us, that would help us provide, what would you say, what analysis would go in your head to tell us what is good data versus bad data?
Yeah, I mean, I think journalism does this well, too, this idea that, I mean, journalists always have to have multiple sources before they publish a story. I think the point made in the front row about, trusting CNN, maybe I don't feel comfortable with that either. But I think information literacy, we can spot a lot of things that would indicate that this is, no one else is corroborating this story except other folks in this particular chat room. But if you can teach those skills, people can have some lingering doubt, which will cause them to, go to an authoritative resource. And the other thing, the technological solution that I've seen, I think browsers have a lot of potential. So we all have to use like one of, 2 browsers, 3 browsers. I think we can have, just like you get an alert that this site might not be secure, you can get an alert that says this is a known fake news site. So then if you believe the conspiracy theory, you're choosing to do so. You're not naive about it. So I think browser warnings could be really cool. Yeah.
All right, next question right here in front of you.
You use Google as the universal search method. There are other search methods such as DuckDuckGo. Do you know of any difference or biases between the different searches?
No, good question. I'm not familiar with that one. I think that the bulk of the traffic is going to Google now, and maybe you could throw in what is the second contender? Bing? Yeah, I guess Bing.
Yeah, no one knows what it is.
Yeah. So no, but I mean that would be interesting. I think the critical mass though is with Google, so I think we're going to have to solve it either in Google or in the browser. I think the browser, we forget, is our universal portal to all things on the web. So that browser warnings, I think, have a lot of potential.
All right, last question over here to your far right.
Hi, I think you might have touched on this, but don't you? It sounds like these skills have to be taught in high school or middle school, because I mean, Google fake news, or if I see a story like a rational, or you would hope that we teach people, you should Google, is this true, to figure that out.
Yeah, I think especially with screen time. I mean, I see at the airport, I see 2-year-olds that are more fluent on devices than I am, which is terrifying. So I think school librarianship is another area which I didn't cover, but unfortunately that's increasingly defunded. So that might be an area where we think about if information literacy is that critical to us, to our society, then maybe we need to better fund school libraries. Because yeah, you're right. The earlier they learn these skills, the better.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Rob Ross.